Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. It was a late evening in December when I decided to take a long walk through the forest behind my house. I had been feeling cooped up for days, and the heavy snow outside had been calling to me like a secret I wasn't supposed to know. The wind was howling, bending the trees in odd, twisted shapes, and the snow had begun to fall heavily, like a million little icy daggers biting at my face. But the thing that really got to me was the silence. It was almost unnatural how quiet everything was. The snowflakes drifted down in thick, clumpy sheets, but the world felt still. Too still. I had always found a kind of peace in these walks. The woods behind my house were familiar, almost comforting, and in the winter, when the ground was covered in white, it was like stepping into a different world. A world that felt untouched, as if time had stopped altogether. I usually loved this feeling of solitude, this chance to be alone in nature, away from the noise of the everyday. But tonight, something felt different, off somehow. At first, I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just the cold, or maybe the strange mood I had been in all week. I kept walking, letting my boots crunch through the snow with each step, listening to the soft, muffled sound of the forest around me. But the further I went, the more unnerving the silence became. No animal sounds, no birds, no rustling of leaves, nothing. It was like the world itself had gone mute. I stopped for a moment, standing still in the middle of the path, my breath fogging up the cold air in front of me. I turned, half expecting to see someone behind me, maybe another hiker or someone else out for a walk, but there was no one, just the thick blanket of snow falling all around and the twisted trees that looked like they were reaching out to grab me. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the creeping feeling that was slowly rising in my chest. That's when I heard it, a faint sound. At first, it was just a whisper so soft I thought it was the wind, but then it came again, louder this time. It was a voice, a whispering voice, carried on the wind, like it was coming from just behind me. I spun around quickly, my heart racing. I told myself it was nothing. The wind, the trees. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The whisper came again, closer this time, and then another from a different direction. My blood ran cold. I thought I saw something in the distance, a shadow between the trees. Maybe, but when I focused on it, it was gone. I stood frozen in place for what felt like an eternity, straining my ears for any sound, any movement, but the forest remained unnervingly silent. I took a few more steps, my breath catching in my throat. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but the whispers continued, now so clear that they didn't sound like the wind at all. They sounded like voices, faint, distant voices, but they were getting closer. I kept walking, trying to shake off the terror creeping up my spine. It was just my imagination, just the cold. I told myself that over and over, but with each step, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. My heart hammered in my chest as I broke into a jog, my feet slipping on the icy path beneath me. And then, just when I thought I was about to outrun it, when I thought maybe the sound of my own footsteps would drown out whatever it was that was chasing me, it happened. A voice. a deep, gravelly voice that cut through the stillness like a knife. "Come back," it said. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't dare turn around, but I felt it. Something was there, something watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt the sudden, overpowering urge to run. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I turned and bolted back the way I came, my heart pounding in my chest. The snow seemed to fall harder now, the wind picking up like it was trying to chase me down. I didn't dare look back. Every step I took was heavier, as if the snow was trying to pull me back into the woods. But I kept going. My legs ached. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I ran past the trees, past the clearing, and back toward the house, my feet slipping on the ice and snow. But it wasn't the snow beneath me that made me stumble. It was the feeling of something following me, something close, something that was never far behind. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me, growing louder with every step. I could hear them now, clear as day, calling my name. Soft at first, but then it was more like they were chanting it. The voice was so close, I could almost feel the words against my skin. "Come back, come back, come back." The door to my house loomed ahead, but I didn't know if I could make it. My legs were trembling, my lungs on fire from the cold air. But I pushed myself forward, driven by sheer panic. When I reached the door, I fumbled with the handle, my hands shaking. Finally, it gave way, and I stumbled inside, slamming the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, gasping for breath, trying to shake off the feeling of someone or something still lingering just outside. The whispers had stopped, but the air inside the house felt colder than it had any right to be. The temperature had dropped, and I could see my own breath hanging in front of me like a fog. And then, just when I thought the worst was over, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from the hallway, just outside the door. I froze. There was no one there. I hadn't heard anyone enter, but the footsteps were unmistakable, just on the other side of the door, moving closer. With my heart in my throat, I dared not open the door. I didn't move. I barely breathed. And then they stopped. The footsteps were gone. But the last thing I heard before everything fell into silence again was the faintest whisper of my name, carried on the wind. "Come back." And I knew, deep down, that whatever was out there wasn't going away. Not now. Not ever. Story 2. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway. Just a few days with my closest friends, away from the noise of the city, away from the chaos of our lives. We'd rented an old cabin, tucked deep in the woods. The kind of place you see in movies, the kind that promises a peaceful retreat, but always seems to have something lurking beneath the surface. But we were young, full of excitement, thinking only about how nice it would be to escape everything. No cell service, no distractions, just us, the snow, and the woods. When we arrived, the snow had already started falling heavily. The ground was covered in a fresh blanket of white, and the trees looked almost magical, draped in their winter coats. The air was crisp, biting, and carried the scent of pine and earth. It was the perfect winter scene, the kind that made you think you were stepping into a postcard. The cabin itself was small but cozy. It had the kind of charm you could only find in places like this. Old wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and the kind of creaking floorboards that made you feel like the house was alive. It was isolated, no neighbors for miles around, just the forest stretching in every direction. It was quiet, too quiet, but that was part of the charm, right? The first night was peaceful. We made dinner, told stories, and laughed as the wind howled outside. The snow picked up again, turning the world outside into a swirling blur of white. We huddled together by the fire, enjoying the warmth and the comfort of good company. But as the night wore on, things started to change. The wind grew stronger, rattling the windows, making the trees outside bend and groan. But the most unsettling thing was the creaking. It started faintly at first, just the usual sounds of an old house settling. But then it became rhythmic, almost deliberate. Creak, creak, creak. It wasn't like the usual house noises. It was as if someone was walking around upstairs. We laughed it off at first, chalking it up to the wind or maybe just the house itself. After all, it was old, but the sound didn't stop. It was almost like a slow, measured step, one after another, like someone pacing back and forth. My friends and I exchanged uneasy glances. "It's just the house," one of them said, trying to reassure the rest of us. But I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Something didn't sit right. I was the first one to get up and check. I told them I'd go upstairs, that I'd make sure no one was there, that I'd prove it was just the wind. But as I climbed the stairs, every creak seemed to echo through the house, making my heart beat faster. The air felt colder up there, colder than it had any right to be. I stepped into the small hallway at the top of the stairs, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The house was still too still. I checked each room. Nothing. No one. Just empty, cold spaces. I walked back down the stairs, and the creaking stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in my chest, but it lingered, clinging to me like a thick fog. That night, we all huddled together by the fire, trying to ignore the creeping sense of something watching us. But it was impossible. Every time the wind howled outside, it felt like it was calling us, beckoning us into the dark corners of the house. We talked about leaving, about driving back to town, but the snow had fallen so heavily that the roads were nearly impassable. We were stuck, and that thought, more than anything, made the tension rise. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was sitting by the window, staring out into the blizzard. The snow was coming down in thick, heavy flakes, obscuring everything beyond the cabin. It was so white, so pure, that it felt like the world had been washed clean of anything evil. I wanted to believe that, but then I saw it, a face. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was so faint, just a shadow against the frosted window. But when I looked closer, I could see it. Pale skin, hollow eyes, lips pressed tightly together in a kind of grimace. It was the face of someone who had been frozen in time, who had been trapped in the snow for far too long. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The world seemed to stop around me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stared at that face, wondering if it was real, if it was someone who had gotten lost in the storm. But the more I stared, the more I realized it wasn't someone. It wasn't human. I screamed. I don't know what else I could have done. The face was gone the moment I opened my mouth, but the damage had been done. My friends scrambled to their feet, asking what was wrong. I couldn't form the words. I pointed at the window, but there was nothing there. The snow had covered the glass again, leaving it frosted over and clear. It was just the wind, one of my friends said, trying to calm me down, but I knew it wasn't. I knew what I had seen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was still there. We spent the rest of the night by the fire, trying to stay warm, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that filled the room. But no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't escape the feeling that we weren't alone. We weren't just being watched, we were being hunted. By morning, the snow had stopped. The world outside was a perfect, untouched white. The air was still and cold, and the trees stood silent against the horizon. We packed up quickly, eager to leave, but as I glanced back at the cabin from the road, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the frosted window, was the same face, pressed against the glass, watching us leave, its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for just a moment, I could have sworn it smiled. We never spoke of that weekend again. We never even mentioned the cabin to anyone. It's as if we all agreed, without a word, that some things are better left buried in the snow, forgotten. But every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I still feel the weight of that gaze on me, and I wonder if it's watching me now, waiting for the right moment to step out of the darkness again. Story 3. I never thought a night that started like any other would end with me wishing I had never left that diner. It was just supposed to be another shift, another few hours of greasy fries and coffee refills, the usual crowd trickling in to escape the winter chill. But then the storm hit. It came out of nowhere. 1 minute, the sky was clear. The next, it was as though the heavens had torn open and sent every flake of snow they had to earth. The wind kicked up, whirling the snow into white, blinding curtains. The kind of snowstorm that made you wonder if you were still in the same world, or if you had somehow slipped into another. I finished my shift as quickly as I could, wiping down the counters, trying not to let the unease settle in my chest. I could feel it, that strange pressure that builds up in the air before a storm, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It was late, too late really, but there was no choice but to drive home. The roads would be bad, but I couldn't stay at the diner all night. I just wanted to get home and forget about the snow, forget about the cold. When I stepped outside, the world was already buried under a thick layer of snow. The street lights flickered, struggling against the darkness that seemed to have swallowed the town whole. I could barely make out the outline of my car through the haze of falling snow, but I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. The roads were worse than I expected. The snow was already several inches deep, and the wind made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I drove cautiously, gripping the wheel tightly, keeping my eyes on the road, my breath fogging up the windshield. The only sound was the hiss of the wipers trying to clear the snow away and the deep hum of the engine. Nothing else. Not a soul was out here. Everyone had the sense to stay home. I reached the outskirts of town, where the road curved sharply into the woods. There was something about that stretch of road that always gave me the chills, even on the clearest of nights. Maybe it was the way the trees hung over the road, their branches gnarled and twisted like old hands reaching for the sky. Or maybe it was the fact that the road was so empty, so isolated. There was no one around for miles. But tonight it felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I crept along the road, the headlights cutting through the snow, I saw it. A snowplow. It was just sitting there, half buried in the snow on the side of the road, its massive blade angled up toward the sky, frozen in place. The plow was so out of place, it might have been a mirage. Who would leave a snowplow out here, alone in the storm? There was no way to know when it had been abandoned, whether it had been here for minutes, hours, or even days. But there was something about it that felt wrong, something off. I slowed the car down, not out of curiosity, but out of an uneasy feeling that I couldn't quite place. My headlights hit the plow, casting a sickly yellow glow on the abandoned vehicle. The door was wide open, hanging on its hinges like it had been thrown open in a hurry. I could see the engine was still warm, the faint steam rising from under the hood, but there was no one inside. No driver, no sign of life. Just the dark, empty interior of the plow. For a moment, I thought about just driving on, but something in me pushed me to stop. Maybe it was the feeling that I wasn't alone. Maybe it was the thought that I should check to make sure no one was hurt. Or maybe it was that damn curiosity I couldn't ignore. I parked the car on the shoulder, the engine still running as I stepped out into the cold. The wind cut through me like a blade, and the snow began to pile up around my feet. As I walked toward the plow, the chill of the night seemed to seep into my bones, numbing me in ways I couldn't explain. The snow was thick now, nearly up to my knees. When I reached the plow, I hesitated. I looked inside, but there was no one there. The seat was empty. No belongings. No sign of a struggle. Just the cold, empty cab. I walked around the back, my boots crunching in the snow, and that's when I saw it. A bloody handprint. It was smeared across the rear window, the dark red stain standing out like a warning. It wasn't just a little smear. It was as if someone had pressed their hand flat against the window, leaving a trail of blood as they pulled away. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Who had been here? Who had been in the plow? And more importantly, where were they now? The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was something behind me, a figure. It was barely visible through the swirling snow, just a shadow at the edge of the trees, standing completely still. I could see nothing more than the vague outline of a person, but I knew, deep in my gut, I wasn't alone. The wind howled, the snow stinging my face, and then, just as I was about to call out, I heard it. A whisper, low, raspy, like a voice that had been trapped for too long in the cold. Don't go back. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't step closer, but I could feel it. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see its face. And then, as quickly as the words came, they stopped. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand there in the snow, wondering what the hell was going on. I turned, running back to my car, the snow crunching beneath my feet, my heart racing in my chest. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I turned the key and floored the gas pedal. I didn't stop until I was home, safe and sound in my warm bed. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching me, waiting for me to return. And I never did, not once. To this day, I still wonder who had been driving that snowplow and what had happened to them. But I know one thing for sure. Whatever was out there in the storm, watching me from the woods, wasn't human. And I'm not sure it ever was.